All right, so we're going to do some couple of things today. I'm going to record this, make a YouTube out of it. So we're going to do some energy play, a little bit. This is going to be more of an internal, emotional kind of thing than our normal chakra, meridian type of focus. So this is Alan Watts, and I like what he says. This is like, I saw this in one of his videos, and he's a progressive thinker. I'm assuming you are here because you want to wake up, or you're just teasing yourself and flirting with the idea of waking up. You know, and I think we all do that. We all like, I want to wake up, but not all the way. I don't want to see everything. You know, and that comes from our own stuff inside of us. So I've had an interesting week. I'm going to share some of that. I think what I'm going to do is I had a different order to this. I'm going to kind of address what I wanted to kind of share, and then I'll come back and we'll play. I'll cut the tape off so that we can play in a different kind of way, just because recording it would just be ridiculous because the people that aren't here couldn't see and interact. But so this first part is going to be kind of addressing this here about, you know, are you really ready to wake up, or are you just flirting with the idea? And I think we all do that. I mean, I think everybody that comes to this group is really aware. I'd say aware more than most people, or the average person walking around there. But sometimes we just kind of tease ourselves. Like, I want to wake up, but not completely. And growth, from my personal perception, you know, there's levels of growth. Just like you have a child, or we've all been children. It's like there's stages of our growth. It's like we stay with our mother, we stay close with our mother, then we strike out on our own, we look for our own power, our own understanding, and then we come into like being an adult. And I think spirituality is the same way. So we can be a spiritual child in the beginning. Number one, to start growing up takes like conscious awareness. And that means we can be aware of things, but it doesn't mean they change just because we're aware of them. And in the end, really, it comes down to being able to command your consciousness, not anybody else's, but your own consciousness. Because when it comes down to being a spiritual adult, it's not about controlling anybody else except yourself and finding what's best for you. And I've said this before, I'm just throwing it in here. So maybe not having what it takes is really not doing what it takes. And owning it equals living it. So I'm really talking to myself in areas of where I'm not fully living my truth on a daily basis like I would like to. And I want to incorporate that more and more as far as daily practices, meditating. So I'm going to skip these energy exercise because in the body scrying, we're going to come back to that in a moment. I want to cover, this has been my week, and I'm not afraid to share my warts and where I'm growing up, because I don't think anybody out there is perfect. Everybody's learning. And Deborah, who had to just leave, she couldn't stay. She was here just for the meditation, but couldn't stay for the exercises. She had brought me this earlier, and which kind of speaks to that process of that we're all growing and learning. And this is from the Science of Mind. It's like a magazine you get, and every day there's like something to read. And here it says, embracing your infinitude. And so it's like it's a new word. And infinitude is to be we're going to read into it, but to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And that's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, is to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And the world is out there trying to conform you to be different. Even our parents did it to us. You know, peers do it to us. Everything in the world can be pushing on us to make ourselves change. Ralph Waldo Emerson led the Transcendentalist movement in the mid-1800s. The Transcendentalists believe in both the inherent goodness of people and nature. Emerson's spoken and written body of work greatly influenced thinkers, writers, and poets who followed him. When asked to sum up his central doctrine, he replied, "The infinitude of the private man." Infinitude is defined as the state of being without finish. So that means that we're all growing and learning. But there may never be an end to it. It's like forever. It's like we're perpetual students until the very end. I mean, think about even the Bible says this, there's like many mansions in the house of God. There's probably so many different realities out there of things to experience, have, and grow and learn from, that we're always going to be learning on some level. So to think that you have it all figured out, and that you have mastered something, well, there's always another level to it. And we sometimes can be kind of egotistical in that way if we're not careful. And we can look at other people and judge them in a negative way, when really we're all students, every one of us. In 1838, Emerson was invited to give the graduation address at Harvard Divinity School. In it, he discounted biblical miracles and proclaimed Jesus was a great man, but not God. He said Christianity had turned Jesus into a demigod, just as the Asians and Greeks had done with Isis and Apollo. With the audience in an uproar, he became silent and allowed others to come to his defense. It was 30 years later when he was invited back to lecture. So 30 years later after that is when he finally was invited back. Emerson expressed that in order for us to reach higher states of thought, we must reject old ideas and think for ourselves, become thinkers, or he says man thinkers, but that's man and woman thinkers, rather than mere thinkers. In other words, be your own individual thinker and become yourself. The visionary philosopher tremendously influenced the work of Dr. Ernest Holmes, who the science of mind, who spent a lifetime giving voice to the inherent goodness or godness within all life. We have been bestowed within the freedom and the capacity to think and discover our own divinity for ourselves. So we're all free to do that. We are boundless, individualized expressions of spirit and are forever becoming without finish. So it's a continual process. And that was kind of timely because I got that from her today. And I had this experience. Let me backstep a second and go through my slides here. So we're always growing. So there's like one spectrum, one swing of the pendulum to like far left can be just as bad as an extreme swing to the far right. So let's say in this case the far left is somebody that's a pushover, and then the far right is someone that is a bully. Okay? Either one of those spectrums is a negative. If you're letting yourself being walked all over, that's just as negative as being the bully. But those two energies can work together to find the middle ground.
Sorry.
You're fine. Come on in. Hey,
Okay.
Grace.
Good.
So, hello. So we swing back and forth whenever we're growing. I'm going to share with you kind of my experience. My experience is to be a little less pushy. I tend to be within myself and allow things to happen around me. And I have a reason for that, but I want to go beyond that limitation. So what happens is any spectrum. So if you're a pushover, that's just as bad as being a bully. Neither one is good. So what happens, I'm going to bring in my own history here, my own past, because I believe it's important to help other people understand. So that's why I share my own stuff. Is that my father was really a bully. My mother was the pushover. And I really ultimately believe that they came together as polar opposites. You know, they say opposites attract. They came together to teach each other, to find a center. In other words, my dad being the bully needed some of my mother's passivity. And my mother needed needed my dad's bulliness, or not really bully, but the ability to stand up, right? So he was always pushing on her. And she was supposed to stand up, but she didn't, you know what I mean? And that was her life path. And I tended to model myself after her because I saw what my dad's aggressiveness did to my mother. So I tend to model my mother, meaning that I would be more of the pushover than the bully. And I want to kind of share some stuff because Mary helped me. Something came up over the weekend, and which is really powerful for me because it was a level of something I haven't really looked at or worked on in a long time. So I sound a little silly. This is the first time I put this together. So when you're learning something, it's like, let's say that you're a pushover, right? And a bully comes along and they're pushing on you. The idea is that you swing over and be a little more pushy. In other words, if there's somebody pushy in your environment, they're trying to get you to be pushy. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But if you're pushing, and you cave in every time, you're not learning the lesson. And what happens typically is, if you just swing something, you know how the momentum slows down, okay? And Deborah and I were talking about it. Let's say that you're on this side and you're passive, right? So somebody's pushing on you. Let's say they push on you and you get a little pushy, and then you kind of swing back to the other side. And then what happens over time, I think what happens is it slows down and you find balance. So as we grow, we're going to have experiences that pull in polar opposites of each other to push us to find balance. Does that make sense? Okay. So I tend to be the pushy, the person that gets pushed over. I allow myself. And I'll talk about that in a second, a little bit further. Does that make sense, though? You have these polar opposites that come together to really cosmically. I think it plays out that they're drawn together because they fit, because of their extreme out of balances. You know what I mean? And they're looking for balance. And as you get older, that swing gets less and less. Hopefully, if you're learning your lessons, you don't swing back and forth so much. So you swing here, you go, oh, damn it, I'm back in this. You swing that way, and then finally, to me, it's like steps. It's like you get higher and higher until finally, it's like at the point you find balance. So I hope I made my point there in a kind of a muddled up way. So Mary and I saw the movie 100-Foot Journey yesterday. Have y'all seen that?
I know, it was good.
It was a really good movie.
It was good.
Usually the movies I tend to see are about consciousness expansion, Lucy, and Matrix, and stuff like that. This was just a good, down-to-earth, human movie. Humanity's ins and outs, basically. Not all together, but there were struggles between the family and the typical things. But what's interesting is it set something off in me. It's a really good movie. I recommend seeing it. Not that it was geared metaphysically at all. It wasn't. If you've seen the previews, it's about the woman that has the French restaurant and the Indian people moving across the street. It's a good movie. But through it, there were a couple of times that I got teary watching it, and I was like, where's this coming from? Oh, shut up.
No, I think it's something beautiful when you see a man actually, cry and express feelings.
Yeah. But there were a lot more points in it that I was feeling teary than I wasn't, and they didn't all fit. Like it wasn't a sad movie. It was a very uplifting movie, and I think that's what I was crying about, was the uplifting part. And then a series of events happened after that, and I hit this really kind of weird space, and Mary was there and she helped me process it. And it was something entirely different that I hadn't really been looking at. I tend to look at my mother's issues because I tend to fall on my mother's side. I tend to be the one that's passive. But this was bringing in the thing about the aggressor. So what came to me, and Mary helped me process this out, is I went back to childhood. I had this weird feeling. We took a nap. I woke up and I was kind of in this space of like I couldn't even pinpoint it. It was like isolated, scared, alone. And I was like, where the hell is this coming from? This is like shortly after watching that movie. So I'm assuming that something in the movie stirred something in my unconscious. Well, I know it did now looking back. But as I'm like telling her, like, I'm feeling weird about this. And so she started working on me, and as she's working on me, she's getting some stuff, and I'm getting some stuff at the same time. And what came to me is I went back to childhood, and I was seeing my father being mean to my mother. He was about 6 years old, something like that. And I was seeing them fighting with one another. And my father, and I don't judge my father, but he was pretty physical with her. Not like horribly, in some instances where it's really, really bad. But he did get physical, hold her, and stuff like that. So what I did is I saw that repeatedly as a child, and I got this supercharge on conflict. So and this is coming to the surface, is I hated to see conflict. And I knew this on some level, but not fully. So I'm trying to say this without all being written out. I'm just trying to go by my mind. So it came out as I had like this thing in a child is like, I hate conflict, la la la. There was like this there was like this avoidance, escaping thing. It came into like I didn't want to see conflict. I mean, literally, it's like it's like the little child, and I put myself in that child's position. It's like, here's a child, there's parents arguing, it's negative, and the child doesn't know what to do, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to focus on the negative and pretend I don't see anything else. Okay, well that becomes like a pattern that you wind up living your entire life, because that's just the way it works. So I refused to see the negativity and went to my rose-colored glasses place. And the deep down feeling was I hate conflict. So as we're processing this and working on this, lots of layers came up. I tend to want to maintain peace and balance. And it's funny that I'm not Libra, but I have a lot of planets in Libra, which is all about balance. So my way to do that, though, because I hated conflict, was to try to absorb the negativity in the environment instead of like confronting other people. So I wound up absorbing the negativity instead of like speaking to people how I really feel and finding balance. That led me to holding stuff in, which was very negative. And I tend to let my borders completely open. And if anything, in reality, we're all connected, but we're also individuals. It's healthy to have a boundary. It's healthy to be able to say no and things like that. But I had such a charge on repeatedly seeing my dad be, really negative to my mother, that I rejected the idea of being in conflict. I rejected being aggressive, basically, is the bottom line. But through the process, what I learned is sometimes you have to push to create peace. And specifically, I wrote down here at the bottom is, and this is just an affirmation to myself, is I choose to confront my problems or uneasiness, whether mental, physical, or emotional, before they become conflict. So during that process, I was realizing that the conflict they were having was they weren't getting their lesson. You know what I mean? They weren't confronting the real issue. The conflict wasn't the real issue. It was a result of the conflict was the result of them not confronting and looking at the real problem. Like maybe that relationship just wasn't working, that type of thing. So that was a good realization for me. It's another level that I'm going to start focusing on. And my own growth and like I said, that little affirmation, if you will, is what I'm really working on. I choose to confront my problems before they become conflicts. I choose to be able to express my thoughts and feelings, because in the past I haven't. And the crazy thing about that is you're trying to maintain peace, you're not confronting the real problem, and you're going to actually create conflict. You're going to create conflict, because everything's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we're consciousness beings. I was trying to avoid conflict, but that's what I'd always create. Because in my reality, Spirit God's trying to get you out of that stuck pattern. So the only way for me to get out of that stuck pattern is I had to have conflict to push me to push. Yeah. I had to have conflict to make me push instead of being the pushover. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And it's crazy how all this kind of comes down and how reality works. I still get amazed. Because after being forced to do that, all this kind of unfolded for me. So what I realize is what I don't confront becomes dis-ease. Whether it's mental anguish, emotional turmoil, physical ailments, or spiritual stagnation, that's the dis-ease. And if you're having dis-ease in your body, then there's something you need to be confronting, whether it's yourself or someone around you or some situation around you. And that was really powerful for me to get, was that. And it sounds really simple now that I'm talking about it, but there were a lot of deep levels to that as I was processing. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. But the bottom line was I just had such a strong charge on confrontation is the right word, but I was looking at confrontation as conflict. And then as I was working with it, I switched, instead of looking at it as negative or positive, it needs just to be like something that, okay, confrontation leads to peace. If you don't have confrontation, if you're not talking about something, you're not going to have peace. Because the confrontation if what you don't confront is going to become a conflict. So it's those things, it's like the elephant in the middle of the room we try to ignore at times. That's going to cause a big problem if you don't look at it and confront it. But in my mind, my pattern was that if I'm not seeing it, it's not a problem. Because that's what I had to do as a kid to be okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. I had to not see the problem to live or feel comfortable enough to live. And that becomes a pattern that I was working off of, and now I'm in the process of changing that, which is being okay confronting things, being able to see what's really there. And that goes for my sessions also, because there's sometimes in sessions I'll be working with someone and that little thing kicks in, and maybe I'd have to be a little like, okay, let's look at this side. You know, yeah, you don't always want to focus on the negative, but sometimes you need to like bring it to the surface, like, hey, you're doing this. And if you keep doing that, you're going to have a problem. But I was like, I don't want to see the bad. So it prevented me from seeing some of the things with people and myself. And I totally believe that we are all students. We're all in this big classroom together. Every one of us is growing. We're all in different grades, but we're all growing. And we are all not in the same place. So that means some of us are going to be ahead in certain classes and some are going to be behind. And there's no place for shooting on other people. Because it's like, how can you look at somebody else's life and say they should have done this or that? Because you're not in that lesson with them. So shooting on other people is no good. But at the same time, we also do that shoulding to ourselves if we're not careful. We put all these shoulds on us. And sometimes maybe we need to confront something, but we're saying, no, I shouldn't be angry or I shouldn't be forceful. But your emotions are there for a reason. So in my not wanting to see something, in my suppressing seeing, the result was I'd get irritated or angry at it because I was trying to shove it down and not look at it. And anyway, it seems like I had so much more to say about that. That's about it. Does that make sense what I said?
Yeah.
So we're going to keep switching back and forth. So, now I'm kind of in this process of learning to be a little more forceful. I'm sure I'll kind of go back the other way a little bit. Hopefully not as far to be a pushover, but you go back and forth until you find peace. That's just a little exercise we'll do in a second. But nobody had anything else to add to that or say anything about that? No?
Well, I think, that when you are little, you try to protect yourself in some way. So you would just close your eyes and then you grow with that, and you don't realize that that's when it seems to be job. So
yeah, we all have a little pattern.
We try to protect ourselves when we are kids,
or be able to survive in this
survive mode. Yeah.
And we all do. We all have different programs, some stronger than others. But that was one I was completely unaware of. It was, I can't do conflict. I hate conflict because I saw my dad being the confronter, or the conflictor, not really the confronting. Because like I said, they were ignoring the real problem. They were just, ignoring the problem was causing the conflict. And now I see that. But at the time, of course, being a child, I couldn't understand that.
And of course, your father was a kind of pusher. He was a very aggressive conflict.
Right.
I mean, you can have a conflict with somebody and talk about it, and everything is peaceful. But when you have that bullying aspect, everything is, is what it can teach you. Like, okay, I'm not going to go to deal with that because I deal with that with my father, and I know where to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would tend to run from conflict almost all times.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to maintain peace, but the realization is if I'm running from conflict, I'm still in a negative place because it's not balanced. Because sometimes life, you've got to be able to confront what's in front of you. Not that you're out there causing conflict, but you're confronting when the problem shows up.
Well, you need to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
It's not just to fight, like
right.
People understand. The conflict is to fight. No, it's to stand up and say, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
And you can do whatever you want to, but you don't go through me,
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the thing that sometimes we just, oh no, I don't want to, it's
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, exactly.
If I stand up, they are not going to look at me the same.
Right.
But you have to be,
and that's what I exactly.
no mean, no bad, it's just
Right.
to tell them, nah,
Right.
don't, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that.
But that's exactly what I would do. I would cave in on that side
Yeah.
to keep the peace, but in essence, I wasn't keeping the peace for myself because I was creating a conflict for me because I was getting more and more uncomfortable in certain situations. So
And that, you're so right when you say you're irritated because that is the funniest thing. We try to create peace and don't confront the conflicts, but then you are mad with yourself and you get irritated because you know what you're supposed to do but you didn't do it.
Right.
So you bring so much irritation to you and then you have the conflict with
exactly.
yourself.
Yeah.
And then what you're going to do?
Right.
Spanking you.
Oh yeah, I mean I would do
Wake up!
right.
Yeah.
And the term that came to me as this was kind of unfolding was there's the pullers.
Yeah.
And it's funny because this is the emotion I got. There's pullers and then there's pushers. Okay, and this
Yeah.
makes me think of Celestine Prophecies, the 9 Insights. There were different energy patterns, and he talked about in there that there's like energy between all of us. And in relationships, we get into situations sometimes where instead of sharing the energy, we're fighting for the energy unconsciously. So my mother, being the puller, would be like, in his words, would be the interrogator. Somebody always asking questions,
Yeah.
trying to get deeper, trying to pull something out of you, right? And my dad, in his words, would have been the interrogator. And that's the come down
Yeah.
on you, push on you kind of thing. And I became another one of those. There's one more energy pattern that I forget, but I became the aloof. I didn't push or pull. I do my own shit. That was kind of my thing. It's like, everybody keep your shit to yourselves. I'll do my own thing, and I'll be aloof. I'll take care of my own energy, you know. But that's still out of balance. You got to be able to fluctuate sometimes. So I would be aloof, but then I'd be having somebody pulling my energy and me not stopping it and saying no, or sometimes being pushy, having to do that. But the bottom line is that the consciousness, I had a judgment on it. And when you have a judgment on something, it prevents you from being able to do it. So I literally hated conflict. So I was going to do anything in my power to avoid it. Until now I see it, I have to work on it. It doesn't mean that it's gone like that.
No, you work on it.
Yeah,
You
but
have
now
to
I'm
work
aware-
on it so many years of
Yeah.
not doing it. It's
Right.
not going to just, okay, and now I can, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You just have to go through a
Yeah.
process of learning.
That's why I think it's Deborah and I were talking about it. It's like the swing back and forth.
Yeah, exactly.
And there you go, okay,
You
I
know,
see
you
it.
are there,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm
Yeah.
here. Hold
Yeah.
on, wait a minute. I need to find it out.
So,
I've been reading an interesting book
What's
that
that?
I think is relevant. It's called Siddhartha by Herman Hesse.
mhm.
It's not a biographical account of Siddhartha. It's a fictional historical.
Oh, you were telling me about that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so this Siddhartha, who is not the Gautama the Buddha, or is, if you think everybody is the Buddha, just depending how you want to interpret it. But so Siddhartha goes on this. He grows up in his home, meditating and working with teachers and doing all this spiritual work, and then he leaves his home to go be with the samanas, which is about self-denial, about this
Yeah.
whole
Mhm.
fasting for long, crazy amounts of time, and
Mhm.
self-denial. And then he goes and meets the Gautama, the Buddha, who has these different middle path teachings, and his friend stays with the Gautama, but he says he needs that no teaching can teach him. He needs to. Teachers won't be able to teach him what he needs. He needs to experience it.
Right. Mhm.
So he goes off into his own way, and he comes to this village or whatever, and decides to learn from this woman, Kamala, the art of love. And so that whole chapter in that book is him becoming a merchant and just embracing himself with the world and worldly pleasures and all that stuff.
Mhm.
So it's the opposite of the samana that he was in.
Mhm.
And
So the opposite of self-denial, he was.
he's doing the opposite.
Yeah.
He's going back and forth, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
he's been this opposite. Well, then he becomes miserable and hates himself in that situation, so he leaves after 20 years and goes back to the ferryman, to the river. And there he has this enlightenment, and he realized that he became a child. And he realized he was a child again because he couldn't go back to the enlightenment he was at before he experienced these worldly, got in with greed and over consumption and so forth. So he was a child again. He was starting his spiritual path over, right? But and he had this whole self-hate about it and everything. And then he says Om and stuff. And then, well, really, anyway. So, but then he realizes, and he's laughing at the 20 years he wasted, because he was like, it wasn't a waste. He had to go through that so he could become a child again, so he could start over.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Because, but anyway, so it's just this idea of the child and how I don't know, I've become to this idea that we are all children, adults are children.
Yeah.
We are not, there's not this growing to adulthood necessarily, but yeah, this idea that we're all children, we're all learning, and that there's this child as far as very vulnerable, and then there's this child as far as open and able to learn. So maybe like from a child, we're growing to be a different child.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point because without my mother having her history, her experiences, she wouldn't have been that particular way. Me not having my past experiences, I probably wouldn't have been that way. Of course, who's to say? You put each one of us in the same situation back then, we all could have taken a different route. You know, I could have become an aggressor like my father. It's all different. But yeah, you had to have that experience to learn something from it. So then you go back and forth. I like the idea of starting back over, but even though he was starting all over, he had actually gained a lot of knowledge. So it wasn't like he was starting at bottom level. He had gone over here, and then it's like, to me, it's like the pendulum swings in an upward fashion, and less so as it goes up until it finds a balance.
Well, what was interesting to me about that was that the child, as a child, in this story, he starts off as an enlightened being as a child,
right,
and like works his way backwards.
Mm-hmm.
But if he hadn't worked his way backwards,
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't have experienced the joy he felt in becoming the child again. It was more of a joyous child instead of the child who just knew it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kind of like that Khalil Gibran, you know, with like joy and sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
where like the cup, you know, the cup is can't be filled unless it's carved out, right? So
Right.
you have to have joy and sorrow
Mhm.
together. So so just that idea that it was those worldly pleasures and and being just lost in the misery that most humans are. He experiences that later,
Mm-hmm.
and then he didn't grow up in it. He experiences it later, but he actually, because there's two ways to be a child. You can be like vulnerable and all that, or the positive part of being a child is that you're open and
Innocence,
and,
yeah. You can be an innocence with ignorance, or you can be innocent in an entirely different way.
Right.
And I've heard something before about that, related to Buddhism, and that, that's where I had the yin and the yang. You have the bad experiences, so you know what it feels like when you have the good.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the higher realization of both of those are just two sides of the same coin. You got to have both of those. Like you can't experience being bullied unless you are a pushover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't experience being a bully unless there are pushovers around you. So everybody has this yin and yang quality that we come in and we grow through, hopefully go through.
Did it ever make you wonder what made your dad being like that?
Oh, I know what
What
did.
it was
Yeah.
because he had works?
Because what? Oh, yeah.
Because he has
Mhm.
works.
Well, he didn't necessarily have worse, but he had a father who didn't know how to express true feelings. So, and what's really interesting, you talk about, Lindsay, you're talking about the journey process there. I remember at one time, because we were on our grandparents' farm at one time, living on some of their property. They had like 60, 70 acres. And I remember being in the field out there going, and I don't remember much of my childhood. And I go, why are people screwed up? Why are people so screwed up? Because, we went to church. You hear all this stuff in church like, yeah, this sounds really good. Well, why the fuck are the people that I'm living with doing it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Life would be a little more peaceful, free.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being in my grandparents' field one time, just by myself, and going, kind of just in that kind of pathetic, just lost kind of feeling, and it was kind of similar to that, but not quite. Yesterday, that feeling I had, but it was like literally just saying, why are people so screwed up? And that's been my life journey. I know why people are screwed up. Just like I'm pointing out today, I had this part of me that, when I say screwed up, is we've got these little glitches in our program, so to speak. So my glitch was I was being too much of a pushover to maintain peace. That was my glitch. My father, like Agnes said, my father had his own glitch because of his childhood. It doesn't diminish it, and you can't just look at it intellectually, because because that stuff was deep down. The movie, for some reason, pulled that out of me, and brought it brought it out of the unconscious into the conscious. I didn't realize I had that to such a strong degree. It was a repulsion from conflict. In other words, I'm going to do my damnedest to never be a conflicting type of person that attacks others. But that limits my expression in reality, because then sometimes you have to be that way. Unfortunately, in this reality, you got to stand your ground. Not that you attack others, but you go, no. You know what I mean? I sucked at going, no. So now I'm being pushed more into doing that. But that did set me off on my journey, having that experience to understand what causes that. And I understand it now. Understanding is just half the process. Then you have to really work with it. So let's do an exercise. And this is called Handling Pain by Choosing to Grow. And everybody has a piece of paper. We're going to come back and do the body scrying after this.
You did turn off that video, didn't you?
What video?
I want you to know. You're done, right?
Not yet. You're going to be on there, Lindsay. You're going to be popular.
No, I'm not. You're going to edit.
I'll edit it.
Okay.
Not really. Okay. Handling pain by choosing to grow. This is just an exercise. And this is kind of in the same vein as the conflict thing for me. And there's lots of different ways of addressing conflict. But you got to be able to look at it. And that was my thing. My thing was like, I don't want to see it. I mean, I would prefer, and it's so weird to me because I want to see everything. I want to understand how things work. But I had this major, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see people in pain. I don't want to be a part of that, all that. So this is just a little exercise. Sit quietly and relax. Write about a situation in your life right now that is causing you discomfort, pain, or hurt. If you feel angry or sad regarding another, or they are angry at you. So if somebody's making you feel a particular way, or you're feeling a certain way, then think about that for a moment and just write. This is going to be all just your piece of paper. So you don't have to share anything. If you don't have anything right now in your life, then look into your past and write about that. Surely you can find something in your life where there's some kind of discomfort in your mind or your heart. Of course, we know the body always reflects that, but if you have anything right now that you've got any discomfort, think about that and just write the situation down. We're going to go through a couple of little processes to do it. And again, nobody else is going to see this piece of paper. It's just yours. And you don't have to write everything down. You can just focus on the situation. So again, you're just writing a little bit down about anything that you're having discomfort about in your life right now. Unless your life is perfect, then...
Then tell us, please.
Yeah. Second part of that. Now sit quietly and invite your soul or your higher self. So just imagine, there are tons of exercises out there. Just to call to your higher self, and call to God if you have a lack of a better way to do that. And you're going to fill your mind with peaceful thoughts. Imagine you're rising to a higher, lighter, and more peaceful level. Ask your soul to show you what you have been or are to learn from the situation. See the other person, people, or situation as volunteering to act out this role to help you, to teach you something you need to learn. And then write your insights down. So focus on the problem that you're wanting insight to. If this is about you, no one else. It may involve other people, but you're focusing on it regarding you. And you're just going to ask for guidance regarding it. asking what it is you're to learn in this particular situation. Because to me, that's all experiencing in life is about. It's about expansion of consciousness, which basically means learning something. So what are you supposed to be learning? You know, for me recently what came up was me learning that when I confront something or someone, it doesn't mean that there has to be conflict. And actually, in confronting other people, being okay with that, I prevent a bigger conflict. Because usually when you avoid something, it just makes it worse. You know, if there's an elephant in your living room, if you leave it there for a month, it's going to get pretty stinky. So. What?
And this is all you love.
Yes.
One reason.
What?
There's lots of reasons.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah.
So just meditate on that. Just focus, close your eyes and relax. Everyone in this room is intuitive. You just have to guide your awareness in that particular direction and let it come to you. Just be open to visuals or anything that come to you regarding the situation. And don't be surprised if maybe some of the guidance is to confront something, not just ignore it. I mean, I totally believe that having a positive affirmation and a focus helps, but sometimes you really do have to confront something and look at it. Getting a gunshot wound and then going, I am healthy and happy. Repeating that affirmation may not heal the wound. So write down any of your insights on that. And now imagine that the next time you see this person will be the last time together. Possibly his or her last day on earth, or yours. Imagine that you are the most secure, loving, compassionate, and wise person you know. What would you say to him or her that would heal or release the charge on the situation and create love between the two of you? Or not necessarily between the two of you, but put love back into your heart. You know, love is such a confusing freaking word just because humans are all about limitation. We put things in a box. So when we say love, it has more charge than it should. Like to me, love, one of the best words is accept. When you're loving, you're accepting of someone. So unconditional love would be unconditional acceptance. So think about it that way. Instead of using the word love, what would you say to him or her that would heal or release any of the charges on the situation that would create this acceptance within you of that person? That doesn't mean that that person has to come over for dinner, but there's an acceptance of them. So in your mind, when you talk to the other person, did you tell them things about yourself or did you speak about them? Just something to think about.
We're still on YouTube.
Huh?
We're still on
I'm about to end it though. So I'm going to end the video here on the YouTube and we'll continue with the group privately. Peace.